Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Design Cinema. This is Feng Zhu speaking, and we are at episode number 7, What to Draw. So I do want to apologize for the lack of updates for the last 2 weeks because I was over in San Francisco 2 weeks ago attending GDC 2016. It was a lot of fun, and actually it's because of GDC I am doing this episode on what to draw. And also the previous week, the last week, it was Easter Sunday, I think, so Friday. Let me get a sip of drink here. Yes, this is not going to be super professional. I'll be drinking soda, at least not beer, on camera. And hopefully you don't edit any of that stuff out because editing video becomes a little trickier. I do want to make these podcasts easy to produce. So if you have to go in and edit everything out, it takes longer. So I think this way, hopefully, it's easier to do. So anyways, okay, back to the podcast. What am I talking about? Okay, about the podcast, about GDC. We reviewed a lot of portfolios while we're there. It was about a 3-day show, or 4-day show, but the last 3 days, the public generally can come in as well. And especially on the last day, Friday of GDC, you get a lot of students who show up with their portfolios. Now, most are there to look for a job. They're because they are at GDC. For those who haven't been there, GDC is more of a developers. Well, it's called the Developers Gaming Conference. So you get a lot of job recruiting, whereas like PAX or E3 and Comic-Con, there's a bit less of that because it was more about showing the products. Developer show is more about showing what's behind the scenes. So you have a lot of programming, game engines, coding, artists part of that as well. So they do have a lot of recruiting stations. So GDC attracts a lot of students. So they bring their portfolios, and in the last 5 years or so, there's been a very big increase in the amount of people who want to get into concept art. However, there's also a downside to that, in which I'm seeing a lot of portfolios that's not going to get these kids into the industry. So I want to take this time to kind of talk about what kind of portfolio to build, the kind of problems I was seeing at GDC, and how can you guys out there, to work on your portfolio to make it a better piece, because I want all you guys to make it into the business, and I'll try to do my part to help you guys out. I'm not going to edit this video. I have no idea. If I get too tired, I'll cut it, but we can just run all the way through. If you're a past student of mine, you know that I teach for like 4 hours, sometimes 5 hours straight without a break, and I'll try to do that with a podcast as well. I apologize. This is my office here, so we didn't set up a proper podcast room or anything like that, but I think this kind of format works well for what we've been doing with Design Cinema and as well as the podcast, which is keeping it pretty real, so we don't have this like high budget production going on, and simply we just don't have the time, or I don't have the time to do such things. But I will be doing a Design Cinema, a regular one, after this episode, hopefully very, very quickly, to follow up. And I'm going to try a different format, and you guys will see what I mean, because a podcast actually is quite effective in terms of me just talking and recording. This is fast to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the graphic department here, after I do the podcast, going to insert images and things I talk about. We'll give it a try. That'll be in episode 8, or actually I'm not sure that's even a podcast. That's going to be a Design Cinema. So whatever the next one is, 85 or 86, we'll give that a go. But this episode is still just a podcast version. The next one you're going to have to watch on YouTube. All right, so what to draw? So what are we going to talk about? Well, first, let me thank people who came to GDC to see my talk. There was a lot of studios there. I got a lot of positive feedback. And so yeah, thank you guys so much. I'll be doing that as a Design Cinema as well, but I'm gonna have to wait a few weeks for GDC to clear that video up, because GDC do put that stuff up on their own site. So once that is up, I will release that also as a Design Cinema. And the topic I did this year was about IP creation through design thinking, and I think it's very relevant to a lot of you guys out there, especially if you're already working on projects, working on IPs. I think it'd be very helpful. So again, thank you everybody for coming to the show. All right, so next is, let's get into the core of this episode. I saw a lot of portfolios, but a lot of them needs work. And most of these students are asking me, how can I make my portfolio better? So before I talk about the solutions, let's talk about the problems. And the number one thing I noticed was the lack of design. Okay, these portfolios might contain very good artwork, but that's what it is. It's good artwork. In terms of offering the industry ideas, new solutions, new fresh IPs, original content, very little. I'll say maybe 1 out of 10 has something that's kind of like that, and then maybe 1 out of 20, you're starting to see someone who's probably employable. It's because right now concept art is very mixed up. If you listen to my previous podcast about the industry, the state of the industry, there is this huge gray area between, is this an illustration portfolio or is this a concept art portfolio? And majority of the stuff I saw at GDC was generally art portfolio. It was illustrations of random pieces. So it'd be a soldier, and I'll get to that in a little bit later in terms of the kind of stuff I was seeing. But let's keep going here. The one is, what I just talked about is two many subject matters are generic. They're not designs. For example, I was seeing, I think almost everybody had a portfolio that had a post-apocalyptic scene with a guy or a girl walking around with a dog. That was like in almost every portfolio. Some kind of spiky alien landscape was in pretty much everyone's portfolio. Generic fantasy stuff like a warg or an elf, basically something you've seen in an RPG game for many hundreds of times. It's in the portfolio. So that's very, very general stuff. And then maybe some cartoony stuff to show variations in style. So you have some photoreal, photo bash things, and then you get this kind of cartoony look. So that was very common. And the next is way too little pieces. The average count, I would think, from all the portfolios I saw, it was maybe 8 to 10 pieces. That's it. That's the entire thing. So if it's an iPad, I slide for 8 times and that's it. That's the end of the portfolio, or maybe 10. Very few people have more than maybe 15 to 20 to maybe 30 pieces. And keep in mind, this business, we're paying for ideas and designs. And if you show me only 8 designs or even 10 designs, that's so little stuff for me to make a decision of your design process. And which, by the way, I didn't see at all. Maybe from a few selected students had process. Most did not have process thinking in their portfolio. What I mean by that is thumbnails, thinking drawings, development drawings, black and white sketches, basically their brain on paper. The only thing I saw was the final solution of the designs. And because there's a lack of that thinking process, the final solution themselves are pretty generic, right? So that's the majority of the problems. And also, when you go to a GDC, you have a lot of booths next to us. Like our schools there are kind of crowded with other schools. And then surrounding us, a lot of companies. Like I think there was Crystal Dynamics, Sony, Avalanche Studios, this variety of companies. And they're also hiring people, right? And it was a very strange disconnect to see these portfolios show up at our booth that has nothing to do with any of the companies looking for people. And it's a strange thing to be in, because I tell our students the same thing. If you're hiring for say, to become a doctor or to become a mathematician or to become a history teacher, you will think that whatever you're applying with a job is completely related to what you're getting into, right? So if you're a doctor, if you're a surgeon, you'll be applying with here's the surgical procedures I've done, here's the kind of the write-up on how I'm going to approach this, how to remove this tumor, for example, here's the steps I'll take. That way the hospital sees your line of work and knows exactly what you do and how good you do it at. Same with a mathematician. If you want to go become an astrophysicist, you'll probably be showing formulas that's related to astrophysics. But in concept design, in gaming especially, there's this huge disconnect between there's Just Cause guys over there and there's the Tomb Raider, Crystal Dynamics over there. And here we are looking at a spiky alien mountain, which nobody makes. Just to name a few movies or games. Let's start with some games that's popular right now. Okay, this is March 2016. Just in case people are listening to this like 2 years later, like what the heck, these games are so old. Okay, as of 2016 March, let's put some big games out there, and then let's see the kind of content that we're seeing from the students. For example, The Division just came out from Ubisoft. Where does it take place? It takes place in a kind of a post-apocalyptic New York, real world New York. No aliens, no made up crazy stuff. Real world military stuff as well. The guns are real, the backpacks, the gear they use, all real. The layouts of the apartments, the layout of the city, all based on reality, right? So that's The Division. Next, Rise of Tomb Raider. Okay, Crystal Dynamics, we just mentioned it. What is it? It's a kind of a made-up world-ish, but it's completely grounded. These tombs are not alien planets. They're not weird, bizarre places. They're generally inspired from Mayan, Egyptian, Cambodia, right? These type of places. And Lara Croft herself is very much grounded to reality. So you're not getting a strange character in a strange world. Okay, so another product that's grounded to reality. Okay, another one, Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Okay, this one's based in London, kind of a steampunk era. That's not even steampunk, Victorian time, London, 1800s. Pretty grounded. All your buildings, your architecture, your vehicles, your wagons, your horses, your factories, all grounded to reality. In fact, not just grounded, they're referenced directly from reality. So another product that's grounded in the real world. Okay, let's do one that's not. Fallout 4. But Fallout 4, if you look at it, is not a generic game. Oh, by the way, thank you Bethesda. So some Bethesda guys showed up at our talk, so it was really cool to talk to some of the Fallout guys. Anyways, back to their IP. Fallout 4's future is a 1950s version of the future, right? So if you go back and read the comic books from like the 50s or so forth, it's kind of like their vision of the year 2000. So vehicles kind of take on this jet age design. So you look at their cars, they have jet engines on them, they have fins on them, their guns tend to look like ray guns and so forth. But that is a very distinct design language. It is still based heavily on reality, where the kind of the art movements or the design movements of the 50s. It is not generic tech, which is something I saw in the portfolios. There's a lot of kind of generic sci-fi, which is this 45-degree angle on the armor, a cool looking helmet with some lights on it, and holding some giant rifle. But it's not locked to any time period. It is not any kind of like, is it NASA based? Is this DARPA based? Is this Lockheed Martin based? Or is this 1950? No, it's just kind of generic sci-fi. And you look at games like Fallout, no, they need someone who understands the architecture, the design style of that time period to make a fictitious world that is Fallout 4. Okay, let's keep going here. Along that path, we got Far Cry Primal, right, which also came out. So even though the game is crazy, it's 10,000 BC or something like that, right? But it is still based heavily on reality. Now, no, Ubisoft made it kind of crazy with the big horns and spikes that I don't think they have, but the world is still pretty much grounded. It has a grounding to start with, which you have mammoth and forests and trees and so forth. So grounded. Okay, next one, Just Cause 3, right? We're mentioning Avalanche Studios. It's also a world that's over the top. It's very this Michael Bay explosion type of IP, but you still got real world architecture, you got real world landscapes, you got real world weapons, helicopters and planes and so forth. That's very much grounded, and you're basically causing destruction within this world. But yet look at the portfolios out there. It's all made up worlds. Everything's post-apocalyptic. Everything's alien-based, 10,000 story tall towers and so forth. It's like, how do we use these portfolios for these IPs? Now let's go to the film side as I take a drink of water here. And look at some popular movies that's out right now in as of March of 2016. Zootopia, right? Big film from Disney. Now you look at this IP and you'd be like, wow, that's pretty out there. But however, the IP is actually extremely grounded. First of all the animals are real, were real world based, right? You got rabbits, foxes, rhinos, and so forth. And if you look at the design of the movie, it's actually very close to the real world counterpart. They just made it stylized. For example, everyone's seen the DMV scene, right? With the sloth. Look at the design of the DMV. It is modeled after a real DMV. If you look at the police station, right, for those who've seen the film, I'm not going to spoil anything here for you guys, by the way, but if you look at the police station, it is designed after a real police station. You have real doors, real office chairs, real office desk, the way the badges are laid out, the way the what you call diplomas are put on the walls. These are all referenced in the real world. So whoever's working on these projects have a very good understanding of how the real world works. And actually, this is a good summary back to the portfolio thing, which is these portfolios look like they're being built by an artist who's kind of just in their own world versus looking at the world that's out there. All these IPs I'm naming right now, all these movies and games, are based on the real world and extracted into an IP versus everything in your portfolio is your world. And unless that company stops making their IPs and make your portfolio, very little of that content could be used, right? Let's keep going here, a few more. Kung Fu Panda 3. Right, it's another one. Also based heavily on Asia, China, architecture, China stories. Same with the animals. All the animals exist. All the historic buildings, all reality based. Here's a crazy one, Deadpool, right? Tim Miller film. So Tim Miller, great guy. The guy who made me read all these books, actually. The reason why I like China Midville, those Perdido Street stations, all because of Tim Miller. So anyway, so he directed the movie, Deadpool, but still, it's very grounded to reality. Your cultural references, the world that Deadpool's in, all grounded. Okay, next one, Star Wars number 7. This is a pretty crazy movie in terms of its design. It's way out there, but this film is still grounded. You look at the vehicles in there, the people, the places they go, especially the planets. When we're working on Star Wars, George made a very specific thing that Star Wars does not have planets that are alien. So if you think back to Tatooine, Mustafar, let me see if I can name them, Geonosis, Utapau, you have the city planet, what is that called? Name forgets me. You guys might kill me. It's like, you worked on Star Wars, you can't know the names. Coruscant, that's the one. And there's tons of them, right? But if you look at them, or Tatooine, did I name Tatooine already? They're all grounded on Earth. You got the desert planet, you got the snow one, which is Hoth, right? You got the snow one, you have Endor, which is the forest based. They're all reality based. And the way that people dress, the way that people act, all real. And even if you look at the X-Wing fighters and TIE fighters, the way they move is very reminiscent of World War II vehicles, because that's exactly what George did when he made Star Wars. That's why you get the X-Wing fighters that bank when they turn, right? They don't do like a 360 spin, which will go into science fiction. Star Wars is a mythological movie, not a science fiction film. So they do things that break science, right? Like you don't have guys choking in space when it blows up and so forth, because that gets into science fiction. So even though the film is crazy as Star Wars, the designs within is actually extremely grounded, extremely cultural. And we're working on these films where we are very aware doing that when we're designing. We don't do crazy stuff for Star Wars. It is out there, but it is very stable. A few more. These are some of the older movies, but still within probably 2015. Jurassic World, right? All dinosaurs, grounded. The park is grounded. Design is grounded. No crazy stuff. And I hope I'm making a point here, which is that maybe you could look at your own portfolio and just ask yourself, something we do to our students. Look at your portfolio and ask yourself, can any of the stuff you're doing in your portfolio, any of your designs fit into any popular IPs, like a movie or a game, within the last, say, 5 years? If you find that you cannot fit into anything, you probably have a portfolio that is not industry standard, because how do we use it? You might be thinking, well, my stuff is so unique. My stuff stands out. My stuff is different than everybody. But that's not the industry we're getting into. This is a product making business. Of course, you want new ideas. You want fresh things. But we also want to see that, can you adopt what the industry does? Use your base skills good enough to work on things like Jurassic Park or on Fallout 4 or on Rise of Tomb Raider. Because if it's only your look, then it's going to be pretty hard to find a job, because unless that one studio sees the potential or their game is matching whatever you're doing, you're going to have a hard time finding work, because people look at your portfolio and go, what is this for exactly? We're here making Tomb Raider and you're drawing alien planets with weird sci-fi. Nothing adds up. Okay, to finish this list up, we have Spectre, James Bond, right? Very much real world locked, BMWs, real cities, Rome, and so forth, all real locations. Mission Impossible, very similar, also going to real locations. And these films need concept artists. We need someone to design the guns in these movies, the locations, the underground, like MI6, for example. These need designs, but they're not crazy designs. They're grounded designs, and it's so hard, believe me, to find a portfolio that has this kind of content in it, especially coming from students. Pros have this stuff, and I'm not talking to professionals right now with this podcast. This is for students who are trying to make their way into the industry. And like, you guys could go out there and try to look for yourself. Look for a MI6-like design out there from students. It's very hard to find. Like, give me a 1950s version of a spy hangout, right, where spies are working to espionage some country. Impossible. Okay, let's try to look for some World War II stuff. Very difficult. Okay, not rendering of a tank, but telling of a story, like a couple of British Marines or something like that marching with a couple of tanks in Africa. It's so hard to find that kind of stuff, but we do need that for production, because we need to show the team what that scenario looks like. Okay, a few more. The Hunger Games, crazy it is, pretty grounded. And the last one up on my list here is The Martian, which came out a few months ago. The Martian is a science fiction based film, but it's very much grounded in NASA designs, right? It's not exactly real, but you could tell the design is not crazy sci-fi. It's not 45-degree angles and crazy giant rifles and so forth. To work on that kind of film, you have to study a little bit of what NASA does. And that's the kind of thing that's going to lead me to the next part of this episode, which is, now that I talked about these problems that I see in the portfolio and the disconnect with the industry, what should you work on, right? Let me take a quick drink here. All right. So first, what should you work on, right? Give yourself an actual project, okay? Even if you might be in a school that doesn't teach this, because right now I'm not putting this blame on the students actually, or even the schools. It has to just do with the industry in general. It's really confusing. I think if I was a kid right now surfing on the internet trying to find my way into becoming a concept artist, I think I'll be confused too, because it's very hard to exactly know what to put in your portfolio. And that's clearly the case when you look at portfolios at GDC. It's really all over the place. You get a few students who are coming from, say, Art Center and these schools, they're specialized in this kind of work. It's very clear. It's like you look at the portfolio, it's like, okay, good, you're a concept guy, you're ready to go work on this game, you're ready to work on that project, no problem. These guys get hired. In fact, I saw a few Art Center guys on Friday, and I'm like, man, you guys are good. What do you have no problem finding a job? And they're like, yeah, we're working on this game already. So like, they don't have a problem. And that shows you clearly, if you have industry-driven work, you will find industry jobs, versus the other students are like, well, I passed my stuff around. In fact, I ran to a few students that's been around for a while. Like I saw them in a previous GDC, actually, the last year. I saw them down at the Burbank Animation GTN or CTN, I think it was called CTN, and they're still looking for work. And if you look at the portfolio, it's like, yeah, in a way, I can see why. It's because you don't have a design portfolio. You have a illustration based or non-design based portfolio. It's just art. There's no project. So let me go back to what you should work on. So first is give yourself a project. Okay, Keep it simple. You don't have to make something elaborate. You don't have to do alien world versus this versus that. Pick a classic novel, which is what I'm going to do for the next episode of Design Cinema, and just pretend that novel is going to get turned into a movie or a game, and design for it, and design appropriately for it. Don't retell it. Don't change it to another time period. Don't change it to science fiction or anything like that. Choose a novel, for example, Neuromancer, or 1984, or what else? I, Robot. Okay, choose a book like that and just go, that's exactly what Hollywood wants to make into a film. They're not going to retell it. They're not going to like re-change it so it's taking place in another time period, and design appropriately for that. What would you design for I, Robot? What would you design for Neuromancer? And start from there. Another good example will be using a classic game, which just happens quite a bit these days. You take an old game from the 1980s or 90s and you HD this stuff up, right? You see a lot of game companies doing that right now. In fact, Tomb Raider is one of those, right? It's an HD of an old game, or a remake of an old IP. You get quite a bit of that in the game industry right now. So you could pick a classic arcade game and give yourself that project. And the last one, a good example would be an old film. You take a movie from even the 80s, like Back to the Future. I'll be surprised they're not doing another one, right? So like you do a Back to the Future for today's market, or you do like Labyrinth, The Dark Crystal, The Never Ending Story. These are all great old 80s films that could be ramped up to today, and you could design from there. So why give yourself a project? Because that way you're not drawing in the blind. This is something that from these portfolios I saw looks that way. I don't know if these students are building it off of a real project or not, but looking at the work, it's just like one type of drawing. It's like, today I'm going to draw a futuristic guy. Okay, done. Tomorrow I'm going to draw a cartoony guy. Okay, done. Tomorrow I'm going to draw a alien landscape. Okay, done. That's sort of what I see in the portfolio. It's very random. It doesn't seem like it comes from anything. Okay, all right. So once you have a project, start by writing stuff down. Don't put it in your head. Get a notebook and just write this stuff down. Okay, write out all your notes, write out all the different characters and so forth. Again, I will do this in the next episode of Design Cinema, in which you take a classic novel and do all these steps in this order. So write stuff down. Who is who is where, what is this world like? If it's Neuromancer, what does the city look like? What is the feel? What's the atmosphere? Write as many things down as possible. This is about design. This is about coming up with the idea. It's not about the art. So it's so important to get the idea down first, right? Also, flush out the main story. What acts are there? Is there act 1, act 2, act 3? What happens in each act? Where's the high point? Where's the low point? What's the area that needs to be designed? What's the most important characters in this book that needs to be designed or game, right? Get all those stuff down on paper. And then decide a general design direction, okay? Do you want to make your design realistic? Do you want to make it stylized? Do you want to model everything in 3D first and then trace over it, which is totally fine? Do you want a very hand-drawn look, which you saw, for those who haven't seen the Zootopia art of book, go pick it up. It's great. It's got a lot of really nice hand-drawn stuff in there. Or do you want to do a mix of both, in which you model in 3D, you trace over it? Do you want your IP to be very dark in terms of theme, or do you want to be very light-hearted, right? Make these decisions early so you have a plan of action before you sketch, right? Is your IP fun, or is it serious? Is it for young people? Is it for mature people? Do all this, right? Write this stuff. Next is research. This is a big thing that I'm not seeing in these portfolios, which is understanding of the subject matter. When I see a random soldier with random plates, random heads, and random guns, it's very hard to tell how deep the thinking process of this particular designer is. What I see is a very surface-like design, which is like, it looks cool because I put these cut lines in it and I put LED lights and little facets and so forth. And for pros, they could sell that really well, because pros know what shapes to use to make things look good. But when you're a student, you're basically just emulating what professionals are doing, and we cannot see past the design. For example, you look at Sid Mead, okay, when he does a soldier. These are guys with a lot of experience. So even though he's drawing a gun that's made up, it looks like this gun has a lot of functionality to it. Like, it looks like it works because the designer working on this knows how a real weapon works. Versus you look at a funky rifle, someone who's not familiar, for example, with firearms, and design a random gun, you see all sorts of funky stuff going on. Like, you see the shell ejector and the barrel not even lining up. I've seen ridiculous stuff in which a revolver's the part that holds the 6 bullets is outside the gun. Seriously, you think that stuff like that doesn't show up, but you see this kind of stuff show up. You're like, do you even know how a revolver works? Because what you design here makes absolutely no sense. So before you get into a project, research it. Crack open Google. You guys have this great resource now, right? Which is called Google. Research it. If you have to go to a bookstore, get these books. Go to Amazon, order some books. invest in this kind of stuff. And that reminds me, like these portfolios that these students are showing, for example, they show me 8 pieces, but they're showing these 8 pieces. Maybe they put some time into the drawing part of it, but in terms of research, design, thinking, and so forth, very little. But yet they want to trade this for a full paying job. They want a job that pays them, I'm guessing, pretty well, right? But yet from a client's point of view, you look at that as like, why will we pay for this? This has very little kind of your personal investment in it. Imagine you did a project that is Neuromancer or that is iRobot, and you research US robotics, you research DARPA, you went and got books on how robotics work, and you got books on how joints work, and you start designing these robots that just look so believable in a kind of a entertainment way. Now when we see that portfolio, we're like, wow, this guy here, right, this designer here totally likes what they do. They spend some serious time investing in this project, and that's the kind of people we want to have on the team, right? That's exactly the kind of stuff I'm talking about here, which is build up that level of investment, research, understanding, planning before you get into the drawing. And if you do that, hopefully your drawing will show all of that, okay? All right, next, take another drink of water here. Next is start with thumbnails. Don't worry about the drawing. This is also something we see rarely these days, which is the thinking drawings. Back in the days, there's no other way around it. We didn't have Photoshop. So the only way to get to a nice drawing was by doing lots and lots of comps. So you're drawing your sketchbook, your notebook, you draw everywhere. You fill it with tons of crappy sketches because you're using that to think. Now, because of Photoshop, you are seeing quite a bit of younger kids who skip that process and go straight into a finished drawing. But because they didn't go through maybe 50 or 60 rough thumbnails, the design is their first pass, and sometimes that looks generic. Versus like sketching, thinking, refining, and evolving that design eventually to the solution. That is something professionals do, and to skip that is pretty scary. Like, I cannot design that way. I can't just start something and just design it raw as one pass. So start with the notebook and don't worry about the quality. Do these crappy, nobody cares. You're doing this to get the design. You're not doing this to worry about quality. And the thing is, if you have a sketchbook full of these kind of quote unquote bad drawings, we get it. If you bring that to the show and show us your sketch drawings, your behind the scenes, your notebook, actually, I love looking at that kind of stuff because it shows me very clearly how your brain works on paper. All right. Next, avoid looking at too much other artists' work during this time. Okay, another big problem I saw in these portfolios, which start to look like portfolios that are made as fan art of other concept artists. Like you're seeing like snippets of Spart, you're seeing like a Craig Mullins piece here, you're seeing like a James Packer. You almost could see which art they're looking at when they did theirs, which shows also, are you really designing? Or are you just trying to emulate somebody else's design? If you're really designing, pick something that you like doing, that you want to find a solution for, and show it to us. If you love the book Neuromancer, show us your solution, what Neuromancer look like when it's a game or a film. Versus, oh, you just did another version of what that other famous guy, he drew that, so you drew the same thing. That's not going to fly very far as a portfolio, because keep this in mind, if you're showing this to professional studios or art directors, we've seen it all. We also know who's good out there. We also see all the good portfolios. So it's not like we look at your work and, wow, this is so fresh, this is awesome. We know, oh, your portfolio is looking at Sparth way too much, right? So be aware of that. So when you're doing your own project, start from real world references, look at real world things, and try to avoid looking at other people's stuff during this time, okay? Next, focus on the design solutions first, okay, rather than art solutions. Don't worry about how to render a piece of grass or how to render a piece of wood and so forth. That's secondary. That's almost irrelevant, actually. The most important is the design. A black and white sketch with a good design on it goes a long way rather than, say, a generic design that's rendered really, really well, right? So if you're doing a character, for example, how does the clothes make sense? Is the clothes is wearing fitting for the environment they're in? Okay, are the equipment they're taking make sense? And this will help if your design's grounded. For example, you're designing a Tomb Raider-like character. What would that character wear? What does Lara Croft bring with her when she goes into a tomb? These things allow you to think versus a generic science fiction guy with just random armor. You look at that like, what does this guy do? Is he even that? It's like, is he a light soldier? Is he a heavy guy? What does he do exactly? It's very hard to see the design solution in that. So yeah, ground your stuff and think it through. Even for a vehicle, how does a door open? How does a hatch open? You know, does a hatch open this way like a tank vertically? Is it a horizontal? And when the hatch opens, is there a negative space for the door handle to sit into? These things we notice as designers. And when we see that, it just tells us greatly how much you're thinking about the process. I remember looking at an artist named Jay Schuster, who worked on episode 2 of Star Wars. And I was looking through some of his sketches back when I was at the ranch. And when he was designing, I know you guys remember the second Star Wars, I don't know what's called, the one where they're chasing each other through Coruscant. There were these speeder vehicles. And Jay Schuster drew some of these. And I remember seeing a very specific drawing, which he actually drew the door of the vehicle opening, and on the body panel of this speeder, it actually has a very smooth negative cut that allows the door to sit into it if the door is open. You look at that, you're like, okay, this guy definitely came from automotive background. He designed cars before, because he's thinking about the negative space, what happens if a positive goes into a negative. That is true design, and that's why these guys do really, really well. Now, last I heard, Schuster was up in Pixar, probably working on stuff. All right, or even what kind of props are in a room. Okay, if you walk into a king's throne room, what's in there? If you walk into an inn, what's in there? And it might even sound like common sense, but that's what we need to see. Okay, when it's all alien, when it's all post-apocalyptic, when it's all just crazy, it's very hard for us to get into your brain. So even if you draw an inn, and you have tables, beer bottles, and kegs and so forth, at least we know, okay, good, you're aware of what happens in a typical situation, okay? And lastly, try to tell a story with every single element. Okay, why is this object here? If you're designing a little kid's room, right? Say a college kid and he plays basketball, can we identify that from the objects you put in his room versus another kid who plays a lot of video games? Can we identify that by looking at the props in the room? These are design thinking. These are things that tells us you're capable of solving problems versus just drawing something, all right? And next, after you write all this stuff out and start drawing, give yourself a goal and reach it, okay? So for example, you might want to set a goal with 3 characters, okay, 3 main characters with a couple variations in outfits, and then 3 main bad guys with variations in outfits, maybe 5 environmental drawings, 3 production paintings, right? These are things that tells a story, and tons of development drawings. And that's your goal, right? So right now, 3 characters, 3 good guys, 3 bad guys, 5 environments, 3 production paintings. And give yourself, say, a month to do that. It's a long time to do. That's what, how many? That's 6, 11, 14, about 14 main drawings and a bunch of concept drawings. If you could do that in a month, you could actually build a very good portfolio within half a year. And that portfolio will probably get you a job. All right, so next, all right, big subject, which put yourself in the production mode, right? Earlier, I just mentioned give yourself a goal. The next is put yourself in the actual production mode. Okay, this whole episode is about helping you guys build a better portfolio, right? And so you have to take this seriously. If you want this to get you a job in which you're making a living doing this, well, you have to invest in yourself. You have to invest time, money, energy, all that in order to trade that for a job. They're not going to hire someone who does 2 hours a day, have fun with it, and then give you a good job so you can design the next Fallout. It just does not work that way. If it did, remember, I think in the last episode, a lot of people were saying like, how could you work for 16 hours a day and so forth? My answer to that is like, if you could give me a solution in which I myself, for example, I could work for 2-3 hours a day, have a leisurely life, sleep, 20 hours a day or some ridiculous number, and have fun on weekends, do whatever I want, and just practice 2 hours a day. And yet I can work on AAA games and films. If you have that answer, I'd love to hear it, because I've been doing this for 20 years and I have not found the answer, because there isn't one. Any industry that's unique, niched, and hard to get into requires a lot of hard work. There just isn't any way around it. And unfortunately, the world of concept art is a skill-based job. That means you have to invest hours to get better. Most of your skills takes thousands of hours to perfect, and concept art is no different. You cannot do this for 2 hours a day and expect to become a professional within a year. It'll probably take you 10 years to do that. And by then, someone else is way ahead of you if they're doing, say, many hours a day. So yes, the hours are crazy. And if you don't like it, this might not be the job for you. And that's just, unfortunately, that's the truth. So because we do get students who even come to our school and say, I want to do this, I want to do that. We tell them, look, it's a lot of hours. It's really, really hard. Then I know that's what I want to do. But of course, once they start it, they go, whoa, actually, these hours are pretty tough. I don't want to do this anymore. And that's totally fine. It's just you have to realize this job is something that's not easy to walk into. You simply just cannot do 1-2 hours a day, take an easy life, and just get in a job at Bethesda and working on next big IP. It's impossible. If that was the case, there'd be concept artists everywhere, but there isn't. So anyways, you got to invest in this, and that means you got to put yourself in a production mode. Okay, so once you have your goal, give yourself a schedule. For example, maybe you spend Mondays researching and reference gathering, right? So give yourself this thing of less pressure maybe on Monday. So you're not drawing, not doing anything. So just researching and really researching. Don't go on Facebook and Twitter and so forth. Look for stuff, save stuff in folders, get all those notes that you had and research things that goes with those notes, right? And then Tuesday, maybe you're doing thumbnails, but give yourself a goal. So starting Tuesday, you can just draw as many ideas as you possibly can. The crappiest drawings, who cares if they look good or not, but you want to hit a goal of maybe 30 to 50 thumbnails, which is very easy to do. If your drawings are sucky, right? Who cares? They're just thumbnails. And maybe Wednesday is also thumbnails. You do another 30 to 50. So by Wednesday, you have maybe 100 different little thumbnails gathered in your notebook that you can start to fine tune. So on Thursday, pick 3 of those thumbnails and clean them up as really nice line work. Put in your fundamentals. If the characters, make sure anatomy is good. The environments, make sure you have good cameras and good vanishing points and so forth, and just clean them up. And then on Friday, finish those drawings. If you look at this schedule, it's actually very, very generous. We're talking about 3 finished drawings by Friday. So in a month, you got about 12 drawings, right? 3 times 3, yep, 12 drawings. And on weekends, for example, Saturday, Sunday, you could render them if you want, right? So you have 12 drawings in a month. But you do this for 6 months, you have plenty of work to get you a job. There's guaranteed, because that's almost 70 drawings or something like that, 60 something drawings, plenty of drawings to get you a job. And then you don't even have to use them all. So just by finishing 12 nice drawings a month, you could build a portfolio. But you have to be very disciplined, okay? To reach that, don't get distracted, focus on the goal, okay? And also you can give yourself a reward for finishing. So maybe at the end of the month, not the last weekend, once you're done with all these 12 drawings or 10 drawings or so, spend the whole weekend playing video games, right? Give yourself a goal that you want to have and it works, and don't do that goal or don't get that reward until you finish your goal, okay? And also don't rush. This schedule I just used as an example is very, very generous. 3 drawings a week, it's super, super low, but it's achievable. So you don't have to give yourself some kind of crazy pressure or deadline, especially if you're learning on your own. It's totally fine to take it easy, and you'll still build yourself a nice portfolio within a few months, okay? So hopefully that helps you guys, okay? So next, which is getting a little bit into the design thinking part, which is entertainment design is all about entertaining. So the first line, and you might be like, of course, that's what it means, right? But you'll be surprised of how many of these portfolios doesn't have that factor in it, and how many students ignored content that's already there. You could build an entire portfolio designing absolutely nothing. And I'll say that again, you could build an entire portfolio that's going to get you a job by designing absolutely nothing. And all you got to do is extract things from the real world and add a story in it, right? If I go back to my list earlier, in which I listed IPs like The Division, Tomb Raider, Syndicate, for example, Kung Fu Panda, Deadpool, right? Jurassic World. You could build portfolios for these IPs without designing a single thing, because the real world contains almost all of it. If you just drew very nice Cambodian temples, right? Angkor Wat, for example, you draw different angles, but you have to add a story. If you just draw like a clip art, like something you get from the internet, you just copy the illustration, no, that's not going to get you a job. You have to tell a story. And you could just tell a very simple story, like Tomb Raider. You design a character, a girl or a guy, maybe he's an archaeologist, or maybe he's a scientist, who knows, right? He's got a little backpack. And all he does is travel to different locations in the world, different tombs. And you draw those tombs from 3/4 view, first person view, production drawing view, and so forth. But you're not designing anything. You're designing the camera, the story, the composition, the lighting. Maybe you're messing with the shapes slightly, like making things a little bit bigger or a little bit girthier. Or you're taking something more finished. For example, the Mayan pyramids are pretty much all gone except for a few. But maybe in your concept design, you flush them out how it was a few thousand years ago, right? But you're still relying heavily on the real world. You do that, you will find a job, right? Even World War II, you might be thinking tanks and planes and soldiers, they all exist. Right? In books, there's tons of books on World War II. Yes, but the scenarios are extremely hard to find, because when building a game, like a few years ago, I worked on a World War II game with a couple of the Call of Duty guys, but it got canceled, unfortunately. But they were doing stuff, they were trying to do the Russian front, okay, which is something that's generally ignored in a lot of World War II games, right? The Eastern Front. And there was a lot of scenarios we just could not find images for. For example, we want a couple of Russian soldiers sneaking into a V2 rocket plant deep inside Germany, right? We have photos of the V2 rocket. We have photos of the Russian soldiers. We have photos of even the V2 launching areas and some of the German troops. Yes, we have all that, but we don't have a level of that, right? Because real world and a gameplay are very different things. So we need someone to extract all that information and design this into a closed set, especially something like Call of Duty, which is a closed little level here, right? We have to make sure everything that's in those photos are put in here. That's what entertainment is. So you see the V2 rocket in the distance, maybe you see some fuel trucks close to them, then you see some bunkers or some soldiers, maybe you see some airport terminals or at those towers, right? Then we need to insert the Russian soldiers and how do they dress, what kind of weapons are they using, all reference from the real world, but put together so now it's a little story or a little entertainment piece. That's what we need. And there's no design per se, right? There's naturally you're not making up anything, but you are combining things in a way that makes it entertaining. And hopefully that makes sense to you guys. And there's a lot of movies that does this. For example, Gladiator. Great movie, Russell Crowe film, right? If you haven't seen it, hopefully you guys all seen Gladiator. Gladiator is taking a lot of stuff from history. They're not making anything up, but they're definitely combining a bunch of stuff that might not even go together. And Ridley Scott himself mentions this on the behind-the-scenes DVDs, in which he says that the sword he uses and perhaps even the horses, they're from different time periods within Rome. But the audience is not going to care because it's entertaining you. So you could do that exactly with your portfolio. So you might have a tomb that's a little bit more exaggerated. Maybe the Mayan has a little bit less buildings on the real site, but you use the same architecture, but you have a little bit more of it. There's nothing wrong with that stuff. And it's still grounded. You don't have to design anything. So we tell our students that all the time because you generally see portfolios in which 100% of the content is from up here. It's not based on anything. It's not based on reality. It's just floating in this kind of alien void, sort of. So as an employer who's trying to get people onto Gladiator or Braveheart or Back to the Future, and these IPs are all grounded, how could we hire that person? Because there's nothing in their portfolio that could show they could adopt to these projects, right? So entertaining or history or real world is just as entertaining as made up alien planets. So I encourage you guys to think a little bit about that because the industry, especially going to photoreal and these high production things, there's a lot of those projects in development, but very hard to find people to do them. So I mean, just recently we had a project coming in that requires real world military designs. Okay, not science fiction like crazy spaceships and so forth. Imagine what the military will have in maybe 35 years, okay, something of that sort. So they'll have drones, they'll have drone submarines and all sorts of crazy stuff like that. But they're not going to be science fiction. They're not going to have giant thrust engines on them and big glowing blue lights, right? It's going to be something someone like DARPA would build. So we need someone to design almost with that level of thinking, almost like they're really working for DARPA and giving us that solution. And man, it is hard to find that kind of people. They're out there, but they're generally professionals, right? Pros could do that, but pros are also extremely busy. So, and even on the pros, maybe you have a handful of guys that could pull this off and you contact them like, oh, we're busy, we're not available. And then you're out of names. So some of these projects, you're so desperate for a designer. You're even like, okay, if you give me 1 day, that's still good enough, right? Give me 1 day of freelance, that's good enough. That just shows you the lack of portfolios where people that are capable of these kind of jobs, these spectrum of jobs. Very rare. Now, if you want to make a generic RPG game with orcs and elves and stuff, oh man, there's like hundreds of portfolios, or like a sexy girl in a bikini or something. There's tons of portfolios with that. Unfortunately, that's not what the industry makes. So keep that aware. All right, so next, before I wrap this episode up, are some examples of projects you could do. So earlier I mentioned some books, classic films, classic games, right? You can also think of some themes that could help you. For example, World War II, which I just mentioned, right? World War II games, many of them in development right now. No one has really done a kind of a next-gen World War II in a while, except for maybe World of Tanks. Very few. So now you're going to see quite a bit of them coming out within the next year or two. So do scenarios, like the stuff I said. Yes, all this stuff exists, but to put it in a scenario that's gamified, I guess, or a level-like design, is not going to find it. It's very hard to do that. So, do that stuff for your portfolio. It's great. You could do period pieces. Period pieces, anything basically in history. Western, for example, very rare to see Western content in portfolios. And you have those GTA guys, building Red Dead, right? They need that kind of content. But I don't think, when's the last time I saw a Western theme in anyone's portfolio? I think it's zero. So it's very, very rare to see people drawing cowboys and stuff. Again, doing scenarios, very rare. You could pick ancient history, Rome, Mayan, Egyptian. Just tell their story. You could just be like, here's a guy, he's an Egyptian soldier, and he's born, he's going to go on this quest through Cairo, right? And just draw Cairo as the way it was a few thousand years ago. Concept all that stuff out. do your research, do how streets are laid out, how people walk, how people dress. That is a beautiful portfolio. And maybe you could get onto Prince of Persia or something, right? And even modern history, 1950s, 1960s, you could do the Soviet Cold War time period, like Bridge of Spies. You could do 1960s during the moon landing. You could do an alternate version in which maybe we didn't go to the moon, but maybe we went to Mars, right? These are great projects to take on. So maybe Kennedy is like, okay, the moon, maybe the Soviets, right? In your alternate world, the Soviets went to the moon first and landed a bunch of guys on there. And he'd be like, okay, the United States have to compete, so we're going to land a bunch of people onto Mars. How would they do that back in the days, right? It's going to be not real. It's not real, but it's going to base it on as much real research as possible from the 1960s NASA space agency, right? That would be a fun project to take on. Other stuff to think about is realistic military designs, not sci-fi military, but realistic military. These are, I just mentioned earlier, hard to find this kind of stuff out there. You can find plenty of drop ships, ray guns, laser rifles, and so forth. There's a lot of that out there. But in terms of realistic, slightly in the future military, very hard. In fact, at our booth, I don't know if you guys know, we had a student named Alex Jessup who did these 6 soldier designs that are slightly in the future. He still gets freelance jobs this is like 2.5 years ago, that we get contact from companies because of those drawings. They contact us to find him. So when we were at GDC, we had the Bohemian guys came out, Bohemian Interactive, I think. They make their Arma games, right? Arma 2, Arma 3, right? And their Arma 3 is slightly in the future, and they need people to work on those type of things in which the gun, like a M4 or AR-15, you can't make it crazy, but they're going to modify slightly in the next 20 to 30 years. So it's not going to turn into a laser rifle or this crazy science fiction gun with all sorts of laser lights on it. It's not going to do that. It's going to be a realistic based weapon. Combine that with maybe some new technology coming along. That's what they need, and it's pretty hard to find. Okay, another one could be realistic costume designs, what people wear, and that could be back in history as well. What do they wear when they went to a party, went to like a castle and a ball, or maybe pirates, people who sail, or even scientists, right? That stuff is also very, very hard. In terms of science fiction, if you like science fiction, do a project that's NASA based. Also very tricky to find people to do, like what I mentioned earlier for The Martian. Okay, design a thing where we're maybe exploring deep space. We're going to send a crew out into the Europa or Jupiter. How would they design that? And you can add a little bit of science fiction to it, like they did with Interstellar. So it's not exactly real, but it's based on some type of technology. So you're not drawing random sci-fi, like dropship sci-fi, which is very, very common in portfolios. And find interesting sets. There's a lot of sets out there that could be just very fun to draw. For example, laboratories, right? Like research laboratories, hospitals. They're pretty cool stuff to draw in those. Grand libraries where they keep lots of books, thousands of books. Maybe there's a giant statue in the middle and all these books around it. These are all very, very useful content. You could use that for Game of Thrones. You could use that for Fallout. You could use that for Skyrim, right? It applies because this content is universal. A library could exist in a lot of different IPs, right? Or a factory that makes something, not a generic post-apocalyptic factory, which is everything's falling apart, you have staircases and so forth, but a factory that manufactures something. Maybe this factory is manufacturing drones. So you're seeing little drones hanging off the sky. Maybe this factory is manufacturing real-life human cyborgs, right? Something of that sort makes it very interesting. If you want to do ancient stuff, do castle interiors, do dungeons, but tell the story. Who was locked here? Who lives in this castle? Is it a rich person, a poor person, a noble, a bad king, a good king? Tell that story versus just drawing a castle on a hill, which is very generic and very hard for us to use. All right, so before I wrap this up, I'm going to give you a few tips. If you haven't listened to my portfolio podcast, go back and listen to it. I think it's episode 5 or 6. I can't remember. It's been 3 weeks or so. But listen to that because that stuff I mentioned was really, really true and happening at GDC, in which a lot of problems I was listing was actually showing up in people's portfolios. So, and I even noticed a few more I want to add to that. In terms of the portfolio thing, I actually noticed people using the internet to reach their portfolio, which was really weird because places like GDC, for example, you got a lot of cell phone usage everywhere. So the connection goes in and out. So there's some people that have their portfolios online and they're trying to connect to it using an iPad. And of course, it was just timing out. And here I am standing there, they're standing there, they got an iPad and nothing's working. Like, wait a minute, it's timing out. When you're doing that, you're already losing the interview. Basically, the people are like, this is like super unprofessional, man. Nothing's happening. And they're like, okay, I'll come back when I get internet. you really lost your chance, because it shows that, look, you want to get a job from this, but yet you're not even prepared to show the portfolio. So that's something I noticed that I forgot to mention the portfolio episode, right? Which is keep your portfolio offline so you can reach it all the time. Don't have it connected to the internet all the time. Another thing I noticed was passwords. I noticed some people ridiculously long passwords. I did mention this in the episode, which is like, just take your password off when you're sharing portfolios. No one's going to steal your stuff. No one's going to go through your iPad looking for private stuff. They're only looking at your work. That's it. We're looking at a lot of portfolios. The last thing we want to do is surf around in your iPad. So either remove it or just make the password 0000. Because I remember seeing some of these, and the password is so long. The guy's literally typing like a whole entire sentence. I'm like, you doing this for every portfolio you show? Everyone you're showing, you're going to type in this crazy, 20-word password. So it's kind of ridiculous. Just remove it. Make it simple. And yes, the thing I mentioned about 30 iPads was showing up at GDC, which is just covering fingerprints and all sorts of stuff. And they hand it to you, want you to slide across it with your fingers. You're like, man, I don't want to touch this thing, because it's quite dirty. Hard to use UI shows up quite a bit, in which I have no idea how to navigate their portfolio, because they're using some kind of proprietary software that navigates, and it might look cool, but it's very hard to use. My advice, just print your portfolio out. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a simple portfolio. Print it out, slap in a portfolio book, and show it to people. It's so easy. And that way we could touch it, we could look at it, we could point to it. You don't have to worry about batteries. You don't have to worry about connectivity. Nothing. Just show that. And fill your portfolios up. Okay, this is just another tip when you're showing your work. Try not to show 8 or 10 pieces. You got to get at least in the 20 to 30 pieces for your portfolio to even feel like you're a professional. Otherwise, it's too little. Okay, pros can get away with that. If they worked on Assassin's Creed or worked on Tomb Raider and they show 10 pieces from Tomb Raider, we know they have a lot more pieces behind the scenes, because there's no way a pro could work on these IPs and not have other pieces. So maybe they're just showing their best pieces. But for a student, and that's all you show, it's very hard for us to gauge how much work you actually have, especially if you went to a 4-year college and you have 8 pieces of work. We're like, wow, that's average of 2 years or something per piece. Very, very slow, right? So it's how much is that? 4 months per piece, right? So lastly, don't forget fundamentals. This is a core thing. It kills your portfolio. If you don't have fundamentals in your work, you're not even going to get past anything. You're not going to pass any stage of portfolio review, and that's quite common in these trade shows, in which you do have a lot of people who are self-learning, for example, and who are not focused on fundamentals. Instead, they're just focusing on drawing, and no matter how well they detail their characters or environments, the fundamentals look bad, and that's the end of that portfolio. And lastly, before we wrap this up, is focus on design. If you have a portfolio that's really well designed out, even if it's not photoreal rendered, even if it doesn't have production paintings in it, it just has lots of cool designs, there are studios out there, plenty of studios out there, in fact, that will hire you. So that's the last of my tips. Now, in episode number 8, well, actually not episode 8, the Next Design Cinema, which I'll try to follow up sometime this week, we will do a design episode. But until then, hopefully this helped you guys get a little bit insight into how to build your portfolio and what kind of content. And if you have any questions, comments, please leave it below at YouTube. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Until then, I will see you in the next episode. This is Feng Zhu signing out. Bye-bye.